In the heart of medieval Europe, power was fragile. Thrones were never secure. Crowns were more a target than a reward. And betrayal was often closer than a king dared to imagine. This chapter begins with one of the most infamous stories of vengeance. The tale of a king whose wrath transformed betrayal into a legend, leaving a trail of blood, fear, and memory that haunted his kingdom for decades. The king in question was young when he ascended to the throne. His father had ruled with iron but balanced justice with fairness, maintaining loyalty among nobles and peasants alike. Yet the kingdom he inherited was fragile. External threats loomed, neighboring lords hungry for land, mercenary armies ready to sell their sword to the highest bidder, but the true danger lay within his own castle walls. From the very first day of his reign, whispers followed him. Advisors, once loyal to his father, questioned his authority. Nobles who had prospered under the previous reign sought opportunities to manipulate the inexperienced king for their gain. And among them was the man who would ignite the cycle of revenge, a trusted friend, confidant, and brother in arms who had fought alongside the king since boyhood. The betrayal began subtly. The friend, known for his charm and intelligence, gradually undermined the king's authority. Decisions were questioned in private, council debates manipulated, and rumors planted among the court. To an untrained eye it seemed coincidental. To the king, however, there were small hints, a dismissive tone here, a nod to rivals there, that indicated treachery. Medieval betrayal was rarely straightforward. Unlike modern treason, it was cloaked in loyalty, adorned with smiles, and often accompanied by gifts or gestures of support. The king, raised to trust blood and honor above suspicion, initially dismissed these signs. He could not believe a man who had fought beside him would orchestrate his downfall. And yet, the betrayal deepened. The friend secretly allied with the king's rivals, negotiating terms that would benefit him while ensuring the king's decisions failed. Military campaigns were sabotaged subtly, reinforcements delayed, supplies mismanaged, strategies leaked to enemies. Each failure weakened the king's reputation, sowing doubt among the soldiers and nobles alike. The king's frustration grew. Medieval leaders relied not only on armies but on perception. Honor, courage, and decisiveness were as important as swords and shields. When whispers of incompetence reached the towns and villages, loyalty wavered. Peasants began questioning taxation, soldiers questioned orders. And the king's enemies sensed opportunity. The first act of revenge did not require blood. It required patience and observation. The king, realizing that open confrontation could lead to civil war or rebellion, decided to gather evidence. Spies and loyal courtiers were discreetly positioned throughout the castle and surrounding lands. Letters were intercepted, meetings recorded, and patterns of deception meticulously documented. Medieval politics, after all, demanded proof before action. Months passed. The friend's betrayal became more brazen. He openly opposed the king's decrees, praised rivals in council, and undermined alliances that had been carefully cultivated over decades. The king, now armed with knowledge, prepared for the moment when justice and revenge could be delivered, not impulsively, but with calculated precision. When the first confrontation finally occurred, it was in private. The king summoned the friend to the royal chambers, away from curious eyes. The confrontation was calm, almost polite. The king presented the evidence: letters, witness accounts, and records of betrayal. The friend, realizing he had been discovered, attempted to justify his actions, claiming ambition, frustration, and even loyalty as excuses. Medieval revenge, however, is not mercy. The king had learned that betrayal could not be tolerated. Yet he also understood the need for dramatic effect. Public displays of justice were to maintain authority and instill fear. Therefore, the punishment would be not only retributive but also exemplary. The friend was brought before the court. Nobles, courtiers, and soldiers gathered, witnessing the exposure of treachery in a spectacle that combined law, ceremony, and fear. Medieval justice required formal proceedings, even for personal vengeance. The king recounted the betrayals, detailing every misstep, every lie, every hidden act of sabotage. Then the sentence was delivered. The betrayal, though personal, was framed as treason against the crown, the realm, and the sacred trust between sovereign and subject. The friend was stripped of titles, lands, and privileges. Allies were punished, serving as a stark warning to others who might consider treachery. The execution itself was a grim reminder of medieval vengeance. It was slow, public, and methodical. Not merely to end life, but to humiliate and terrify. Chroniclers described it in detail. The friend paraded through the streets, mocked by those he had sought to impress, limbs broken to display the cost of betrayal, public confessions forced to ensure memory endured. The kingdom watched, and fear spread. Medieval rulers knew that control depended not just on strength but on reputation. By executing revenge with precision and ceremony, the king demonstrated that betrayal, no matter how close or cunning, would not be tolerated. But the story did not end with death. Revenge in medieval history often had long-term consequences. The king's decisive action reshaped alliances, reaffirmed loyalty among nobles, and stabilized governance. Yet it also left a cautionary tale. Trust was precious, and betrayal came at the ultimate cost. Over the years, the king's revenge became legendary. Chroniclers recorded the tale, ensuring that future generations understood the price of treachery. Songs were sung in villages, minstrels recounted the story at courts, and the memory of the vengeful king endured. Historians noted that the psychological impact of such revenge often outweighed the political outcomes. Fear, loyalty, and obedience were reinforced more powerfully than any law could dictate. This first act of revenge set the tone for the king's reign. It established him as both just and formidable, a ruler capable of punishing betrayal with precision, patience, and terror. The lesson resonated: medieval power was fragile, and revenge was a weapon as sharp as any sword. Through this story, one truth emerges clearly: medieval revenge was rarely impulsive. It was strategic, public, and designed to reshape perception as much as reality. Kings who survived betrayal understood that patience, planning, and dramatic execution could transform a personal grievance into a lasting legacy of authority. In the broader context of medieval Europe, this tale reminds us that vengeance shaped not only individual lives but entire kingdoms. Wars, alliances, and dynasties were often influenced by acts of revenge as much as by battles or treaties. A single betrayal, and the response to it, could define an era. Thus, the story of the vengeful king is not simply a tale of personal justice. It is a study in power, trust, fear, and memory. It demonstrates that medieval revenge was a force that could topple alliances, enforce loyalty, and leave a mark on history far more enduring than the fleeting life of the betrayed. In medieval Europe, loyalty was a currency more valuable than gold. Knights swore oaths to kings, nobles, and comrades, pledging their lives in service. But betrayal, when it struck those bound by honor, could transform devotion into a weapon far deadlier than any sword. This is the story of one knight whose betrayal sparked a chain of revenge that reshaped his kingdom. The knight was renowned for bravery. He had fought alongside his king in countless battles, risking his life to defend the crown, the realm, and those who could not protect themselves. His reputation spread across lands, not just for his skill in combat, but for his unwavering loyalty, a trait that inspired both admiration and envy. Yet envy was his undoing. A rival within the royal court coveted the knight's influence over the king. This rival, a younger noble with ambition exceeding experience, saw the knight not as an ally but as an obstacle. Medieval courts were treacherous, ambition often outweighed honor, and cunning could triumph over strength. Through subtle manipulations, whispered rumors, and carefully timed interventions, the rival orchestrated circumstances to cast the knight as a traitor. It began with small accusations. The rival suggested that the knight had withheld vital information from the king, during a military campaign. Letters were discovered showing correspondence with enemy forces. Allies who had once persuaded to testify against him, either through bribery, intimidation, or promises of advancement. At first, the king hesitated. Medieval rulers understood the value of loyalty, and the knight had proven himself countless times. Yet, when evidence, though fabricated, appeared substantial, doubt crept into the king's mind. In the medieval mindset, perception was as vital as reality. A king who could not trust his most loyal knights risked losing not just battles but authority itself. The betrayal became public. The knight was stripped of command, denied his lands and publicly humiliated at court. Medieval justice demanded ceremony, the accusation, the presentation of evidence, and the formal stripping of titles were all performed with witnesses, chroniclers, and nobles in attendance. Every insult, every perceived slight became part of the spectacle. Exile followed. The knight was forced to leave the castle and his family behind. Peasants, soldiers, and allies who had depended on him were left vulnerable, further amplifying the sense of injustice. Yet medieval revenge, when genuine, often requires patience. The knight, though humiliated, did not seek immediate retaliation. He understood the long game, a lesson history would later recognize as one of the most effective strategies of vengeance. Years passed. During his exile, the knight traveled to neighboring realms, gathering allies and learning new skills. He studied fortifications, the politics of distant kingdoms, and the art of subtle manipulation. Every interaction, every observation, was calculated to prepare for the eventual moment when he could reclaim honor and exact revenge. When the opportunity arose, the knight returned, not as a soldier seeking glory, but as a strategist wielding influence. His former rival, now confident in his position, had grown complacent. Medieval arrogance was often the precursor to downfall. The knight leveraged alliances he had built during exile, enlisting the support of nobles, mercenaries, and foreign dignitaries who had grievances against the rival. The first acts of revenge were indirect. Supply lines for military campaigns under the rival's command were disrupted. Negotiations for alliances were undermined through false intelligence. Advisors who had aided the betrayal were quietly removed from power through scandal or bribery. Each maneuver was executed with precision, ensuring that blame would not fall upon the knight directly. Next came public confrontation. The knight returned to court under the guise of loyalty, presenting himself as a mediator and advisor to resolve disputes exacerbated by his rival's poor decisions. Medieval politics favored appearances. Those who appeared calm, rational, and loyal could gain the ear of kings more easily than those who demanded justice overtly. With careful orchestration, the knight exposed the rival's deceit. He revealed the falsified evidence, presented witnesses whose loyalty had been coerced, and demonstrated how the rival had manipulated the king and court. The revelation was a shock to the court, demonstrating the depth of betrayal and the precision of the knight's planning. The rival's fall was both public and humiliating. Titles, lands, and privileges were stripped away. Former allies were punished. Reputation, the most valuable currency in medieval society, was irreparably damaged. The knight's revenge was complete, not through rash violence, but through strategy, patience, and intelligence. The story spread across the kingdom. Chroniclers documented the events in detail. Minstrels sang ballads recounting the knight's loyalty and cunning, and nobles whispered warnings about betrayal and ambition. Medieval revenge was not only about personal justice, it was a tool to shape perception, control behavior, and enforce loyalty. The knight's legacy endured. He regained command, restored his lands, and ensured the stability of the kingdom he had served faithfully. Yet more importantly, he set an example. Betrayal, no matter how cunning, could be countered with patience, intelligence, and strategic action. This tale illustrates a central truth about medieval revenge. It was never impulsive, it required observation, planning, and manipulation of both perception and circumstance. Personal honor, loyalty, and reputation were as potent weapons as swords or siege engines. Through the narrative of the betrayed knight, we see that revenge in the medieval era was both a personal and political act. It reshaped alliances, influenced governance, and left a mark on history. The king, the court, and the kingdom all learned that loyalty, when betrayed, could yield a response more powerful than any battle. The knight's story is remembered not only for the vengeance he exacted, but for the methodical brilliance with which he achieved it. Medieval revenge was an art, requiring foresight, timing, and a profound understanding of human nature. The consequences went beyond the personal, they influenced the kingdom's politics, inspired caution among courtiers, and ensured that betrayal was never taken lightly again. And so, the tale of the betrayment stands as a testament to medieval revenge. Patient, calculated, public, and transformative, a story of honor lost, loyalty tested, and justice restored in the most memorable and enduring way. In the labyrinthine courts of medieval Europe, power was never solely in the hands of kings and knights. Noblewomen, often underestimated, wielded influence through marriage, diplomacy, and intelligence. And when betrayed, they could unleash revenge so cunning and calculated that it toppled rivals without armies or open combat. This is the story of one such noblewoman whose secret vengeance reshaped her world. She was the daughter of a wealthy lord, trained from childhood in etiquette, politics, and strategy. Her marriage, arranged to cement alliances, initially seemed a blessing. But in the court where she now resided, power and deceit flowed like rivers beneath the surface. Her husband, though outwardly charming, was cruel and manipulative. He favored a rival family over her own, stripped her of influence, and humiliated her publicly in the presence of nobles and clergy alike. The first act of betrayal was subtle. Small slights, whispered insults, and exclusion from council meetings signaled that her position was under threat. Medieval courts operated on perception, being seen as weak, dependent, or powerless invited further exploitation. She realized that open confrontation would not work. Her husband commanded armies, wealth, and the favor of the king. Direct revenge could mean her death. So she waited. Medieval revenge often required patience. Years passed while she carefully observed the court, noting habits, alliances, and vulnerabilities. She befriended servants and ladies, in waiting, cultivating loyalty and access. She corresponded with her family and allies discreetly, ensuring that, should the moment arrive, her network could act swiftly and decisively. Her first tool was intelligence. Letters intercepted, rumors planted, and hidden conversations recorded gave her insight into her husband's enemies and weaknesses. Knowledge, she knew, was more potent than swords. In medieval society, where secrets could change the outcome of battles or marriages, information was lethal. When the time was right, she acted with subtlety. Poison, though often feared, was not her first choice. She preferred influence, manipulation, and scandal to achieve revenge. Her rival, the man her husband favored, was ambitious and reckless. She leveraged his arrogance, carefully orchestrating situations where his decisions led to public failure. Military orders misinterpreted, alliances strained, and trade agreements sabotaged, all appeared to be accidents or miscalculations, masking her orchestration. The court began to notice. Whispers spread. Nobles questioned the rival's competence. Her husband's credibility weakened as he defended his favored ally, unaware that the failures were engineered by his wife. Medieval power depended as much on perception as on actual authority. Once doubt crept in, control could slip rapidly. Then came the turning point, the scandal. Using documents, letters, and subtle manipulation, she exposed her husband's rivals' corruption, deception, and secret dealings with foreign powers. The revelation was timed for maximum impact, during a royal council with nobles, knights, and clergy in attendance. Medieval justice and revenge were often public, ensuring that humiliation and fear reinforced authority. The rival was disgraced. Titles revoked, lands confiscated, former allies punished or publicly humiliated. Reputation, perhaps the most valuable asset in medieval society, was destroyed. The noblewoman had achieved revenge not with swords, but with patience, intelligence, and strategy. Yet her revenge extended beyond the immediate target. She reasserted her influence in court, gaining positions once denied. Allies were rewarded, reinforcing loyalty and securing her power. The message was clear: betrayal against her, or her family would not be tolerated. And cunning would be met with equal cunning. Chroniclers of the time noted the brilliance of her strategy. Unlike open battles that risked lives and fortunes, her revenge was precise, minimizing risk while maximizing impact. Medieval revenge, as demonstrated by this noblewoman, was an art form, one that combined intellect, patience, and psychological acumen. The long-term consequences were profound. Her rival's family was weakened for generations. Alliances shifted in her favor. The court, once dominated by her husband's favorites, realigned to her network of loyal supporters. Medieval history shows that revenge was not merely personal, it was political, reshaping entire power structures in ways that battles alone could not achieve. Her story also illustrates the underestimated role of women in medieval revenge. While knights and kings wielded swords, noblewomen could wield influence, secrets, and manipulation with equal potency. Their revenge, often invisible at first, could be more devastating because it undermined authority from within, leaving no apparent trace until it was too late. Ultimately, the noblewoman's revenge was about restoration, restoring honor, influence, and security for herself and her family. Yet it was also about deterrence. Medieval courts thrived on reputation. By demonstrating the consequences of betrayal through her meticulous actions, she ensured that future attempts to undermine her or her allies would be met with swift and decisive response. The legacy of her actions endured. Chroniclers wrote her story as a cautionary tale: patience, intelligence, and strategic action could overcome brute force. Songs and ballads celebrated her cunning, ensuring that her revenge, and the lesson it carried, remained alive for generations. Through this tale, we see that medieval revenge was multifaceted. It was not only about punishing wrongs but about reshaping power, reinforcing loyalty, and influencing future generations. The noblewoman's story reminds us that in the medieval world, vengeance could be silent, subtle, and invisible, yet more devastating than open warfare. In conclusion, the tale of the noblewoman's secret revenge exemplifies the art of patience, intellect, and calculated strategy. Medieval revenge was never merely personal. It was political, social, and transformative. Her cunning not only restored her honor, but permanently altered the dynamics of her court, leaving an indelible mark on history. In the medieval world, loyalty on the battlefield was sacred. Kings and nobles relied on generals not only for strategy, but for trust, courage, and honor. Yet betrayal in war could transform an entire campaign into a nightmare, turning the art of strategy into a stage for revenge. This is the story of a trusted general whose betrayal ignited a cycle of retribution that changed the course of a kingdom. The general was celebrated for his skill. From boyhood, he trained with the king's elite soldiers, learning tactics, siegecraft, and the art of command. He had fought countless battles. His name whispered with respect across castles and villages. He inspired loyalty in his troops and admiration among the nobility. His rise was meteoric, and his influence in the royal council grew steadily. Yet power attracts envy. A rival noble, envious of the general's growing influence over the king and army, plotted to undermine him. Medieval courts and military structures were riddled with intrigue. Alliances shifted, and one misstep could cost life and fortune. The rival sought to turn the general's own forces against him, manipulating the king's perception and sowing seeds of doubt. The betrayal began subtly. The general received orders that appeared legitimate, but were designed to place him in vulnerable positions. Supplies were delayed intentionally, reinforcements withheld, and intelligence about enemy movements falsified. In medieval warfare, a single error could mean defeat, and the rival ensured that blame would fall squarely on the general's shoulders. The first battle under this manipulation was a disaster. Soldiers, who had once trusted their leader implicitly, now hesitated, following orders inconsistently. Troops were caught in ambushes where the general had been led to believe safety lay. The rivals stood in council, feigning concern and offering advice that further worsened the situation. The general survived, but his reputation was tarnished. Medieval society valued victory above valor. Failure, regardless of circumstances, was met with suspicion and derision. Courtiers whispered about his incompetence. Peasants questioned his leadership. Even the king, frustrated by the setbacks, began to doubt his once trusted general. Yet revenge, especially in medieval culture, demanded patience. The general, wounded but alive, withdrew strategically. He avoided rash retaliation, knowing that the moment for true vengeance had not yet arrived. Medieval revenge was as much about timing and perception as it was about action. Acting too soon could fail, acting too late could miss opportunity. During exile from active command, the general cultivated allies. He traveled to distant fiefs, forming secret alliances with those who had grievances against the rival. Mercenaries, disgruntled nobles, and even neighboring lords eager to destabilize the kingdom were enlisted quietly. Every conversation, every treaty, was meticulously calculated. He also gathered intelligence. Letters, council reports and market rumors were collected and analyzed. Medieval revenge relied heavily on knowledge of human behavior. By understanding ambitions, fears and loyalties, the general positioned himself to strike with maximum effect when the moment came. The opportunity arrived during a critical campaign against a neighboring kingdom. The rival, now in command of forces the general had once led, was overconfident. Soldiers were poorly positioned, supply lines vulnerable, and the enemy more prepared than anticipated. The general, acting as a shadow advisor to loyalists, orchestrated movements that ensured the rival would face disaster. The betrayal was exposed in full view of the army and nobility. Soldiers recognized the manipulation, understanding that the general had been set up. The rival's reputation crumbled. Medieval revenge, when executed with precision, often relied on public acknowledgement. It was not enough for justice to occur privately. The spectacle was essential. The rival's downfall was brutal. Lands and titles were seized, allies complicit in the betrayal were punished. Military command was stripped. Reputation, which in medieval times equated to power, was destroyed permanently. The general's revenge was complete, yet it went beyond mere retribution. It reshaped the military and political landscape of the kingdom. The consequences were far-reaching. The king, initially deceived, recognized the general's loyalty and genius. Command structures were reformed, ensuring that no single rival could manipulate outcomes again. Soldiers' faith in leadership was restored. Medieval governance, particularly in times of war, relied heavily on trust. The restoration of that trust reinforced stability. Chroniclers documented the story meticulously, emphasizing both the betrayal and the cunning with which it was punished. Songs, poems and tales passed through generations, warning that betrayal in war was not merely a personal affront, it endangered kingdoms. Medieval revenge, as the story illustrates, was a tool to teach both loyalty and fear simultaneously. The general's actions highlight a central truth about the medieval world: patience, strategy, and precision were as powerful as swords. Revenge was not always immediate bloodshed, it was influence, perception, and the careful orchestration of events. His victory was complete not only because the rival fell, but because loyalty, trust, and honor were restored, and the kingdom emerged stronger. Through this tale, we see how personal vengeance could intersect with political and military strategy. Medieval revenge was transformative. One act of betrayal could catalyze decades of planning, alliances, and manipulation, but the payoff could redefine power entirely. Ultimately, the general's story is a testament to the enduring nature of justice and revenge in medieval society. It demonstrates that betrayal could be met with both cunning and ferocity, and that patience, often overlooked in tales of revenge, was the key to ultimate victory. The kingdom remembered the general not only for his battlefield prowess, but for his strategic brilliance in avenging treachery. His story became a cautionary tale. In the medieval world, betrayal had consequences far beyond the battlefield, and revenge could reshape the destiny of kingdoms for generations. In medieval Europe, family ties were often as dangerous as battlefield enemies. Royal siblings, bound by blood, were also bound by ambition, envy, and the relentless desire for power. This is the story of a royal sibling whose betrayal and the resulting revenge shook a kingdom to its core, altering the course of history for generations. The prince in question had been born into a family of rulers renowned for their strength and strategic brilliance. From childhood, he was groomed to understand governance, diplomacy and warfare. Yet he quickly realized that power in medieval courts was never shared equally, and that favoritism could mean life or death. His older sibling, the heir apparent, was clever, charismatic, and ruthless in pursuit of power. While outwardly affectionate, the heir actively undermined the prince's reputation, spreading whispers that he was unfit to rule. Advisors were subtly bribed or threatened to favor the elder sibling, and public decisions were manipulated to portray the prince as indecisive or weak. Betrayal, especially within a royal family, was deeply personal. Medieval rulers depended on loyalty from blood as much as from subjects. The prince's initial attempts to confront the betrayal privately were met with deception and cunning from the elder sibling. Every meeting, every conversation, was a trap designed to further humiliate or marginalize him. The turning point came when the prince was deliberately excluded from a critical council meeting concerning a war against a rival kingdom. Orders were sent in his name, but without his knowledge, leading to disastrous consequences for the army. Villages were left unprotected, supply lines sabotaged, and alliances weakened. Chroniclers later noted that the prince's absence from decisions appeared negligent, further damaging his reputation. The humiliation was compounded by public displays. Nobles, soldiers, and foreign envoys were informed of his failures, as if they were deliberate, and the elder sibling's popularity soared. Medieval courts thrived on perception, and the prince's credibility plummeted. Yet revenge, as was often the case in medieval history, required patience. Acting too soon would have led to imprisonment, exile, or death. The prince retreated strategically. Using the alliances he had built in childhood and abroad, he cultivated loyalty among disaffected nobles, mercenaries, and even foreign rulers. He also strengthened his knowledge of law, strategy and diplomacy. Understanding that a measured, intelligent approach would achieve more lasting revenge than impulsive action. Years of planning culminated in a pivotal moment. The death of the reigning monarch, their father. With the throne temporarily vacant and the kingdom in transition, the prince's network was activated. He presented himself as a stabilizing force, emphasizing loyalty, competence, and a vision for the kingdom that appealed to both nobles and commoners. The elder sibling, confident in years of manipulation and perceived superiority, underestimated the prince. Medieval arrogance, especially among royalty, often became the fatal flaw of those who would betray kin. The prince's return was subtle. He leveraged public opinion, courtly alliances, and evidence of his siblings' past betrayals to shift the balance of power in his favor. The confrontation was dramatic yet calculated. During a royal assembly, the prince revealed the elder sibling's manipulation, corruption, and deliberate sabotage. Witnesses, bribed and prepared over years, corroborated his claims. Documents, letters, and records of interference were presented as irrefutable evidence. Medieval revenge often relied on spectacle. and the revelation was designed to humiliate publicly and leave no doubt of the siblings' treachery. The elder siblings' fall was swift. Titles and privileges were revoked, allies punished, and lands confiscated. Reputation, the cornerstone of power in medieval society, was destroyed. Soldiers, nobles, and courtiers who had supported the elder sibling now pledged loyalty to the prince. Medieval revenge was complete not with violence alone, but with strategy, timing, and control of perception. Yet the prince's revenge had additional layers. Beyond punishing the sibling, he restructured the kingdom's governance to prevent similar betrayals. Advisors were chosen for loyalty and competence rather than favoritism. Military command was reassessed to ensure that personal ambition could not endanger the realm again. Trade law and diplomacy were strengthened under his careful supervision. Chroniclers hailed the prince's cunning and patience. Songs and tales celebrated his strategic brilliance, emphasizing that vengeance could be both just and transformative. Medieval revenge was rarely impulsive, it was a combination of intellect, patience, and precision, capable of reshaping entire political landscapes. The lesson endured: betrayal by family, the most personal of treacheries, could provoke the most meticulous and enduring vengeance. The prince's story became a blueprint for how honor, patience, and strategy could overcome even the most intimate acts of betrayal in medieval society. Generations remembered the tale as a warning and inspiration. Kings and nobles learned that family ambition could be deadly, but that careful observation, alliances, and calculated action could restore honor and achieve justice. Medieval revenge was as much about restoring reputation as it was about punishing the guilty. The royal siblings' revenge reshaped the kingdom's politics, enforced loyalty, and left a legacy that endured far beyond personal grievances. It demonstrated the multifaceted nature of medieval vengeance: as strategic, public, political, and deeply personal. Through this story, we understand that medieval revenge was rarely immediate, it was a careful orchestration, a patient art. Betrayal could be devastating, but methodical action could turn humiliation into triumph, restoring honor and power while reshaping history itself. In medieval Europe, revenge often crossed generations. Betrayal was not always punished by the one directly wronged, sometimes it waited silently, gathering strength in the shadows of children, who inherited the pain of their forebears. This is the story of an assassin's daughter, whose patient vengeance would rewrite history, and remind kingdoms that bloodlines carried memory as sharply as any sword. Her father had been a skilled assassin, trained in secrecy, stealth, and the lethal arts of the shadow. He had served kings and lords, executing tasks that required precision, discretion, and ruthlessness. Yet even the most loyal servant of a crown could fall victim to betrayal. Her father, having completed a particularly dangerous mission, was betrayed by the very court he served. False accusations led to his arrest, public humiliation, and execution, his death witnessed by his young daughter, who would never forget the injustice. From that moment, she vowed vengeance. But medieval revenge required patience, intellect, and careful planning. As a child, she observed. She learned from the mistakes of her father, the weaknesses of her enemies, and the vulnerabilities of the court that had condemned him. She studied the corridors of power, the loyalties of nobles, and the whispers of servants, realizing that subtlety and patience could achieve far more than brute force. She was trained secretly in her father's arts: stealth, observation, and the lethal precision necessary to eliminate threats without detection. Unlike many who sought immediate revenge, she understood that the full impact of vengeance required timing, preparation, and an understanding of the political landscape. Her enemies were powerful, protected by wealth, armies, and alliances. A rash act would only lead to her death. The first phase of her plan was intelligence gathering. She infiltrated courts, disguised as a lady, in waiting or traveling noblewoman, listening carefully to conversations, observing routines, and noting alliances. Letters were intercepted, rumors recorded, and secrets collected. Medieval revenge relied heavily on knowledge of human behavior. The more she understood her enemies, the more effective her revenge would be. Years passed. The kingdom's rulers grew complacent, believing the assassin's bloodline extinguished. The daughter, now a young woman, had cultivated allies among disgruntled nobles, mercenaries, and foreign powers who had their own reasons to destabilize the court. Medieval politics allowed ambitious players to hide behind loyalty and secrecy, and she became a master of this subtle manipulation. The first strike was strategic, not violent. She orchestrated financial mismanagement among her father's betrayers, using subtle influence to redirect funds, delay campaigns, and create confusion within the court. Advisors were discredited, alliances strained. All appeared accidental or coincidental, masking the careful hand behind these events. Then came the personal punishments. Courtiers complicit in her father's betrayal were publicly humiliated. Secret correspondence exposing their deceit was revealed. Alliances crumbled, and trust eroded. Medieval revenge was as much about reputation as survival by attacking both simultaneously. She weakened her enemies without drawing suspicion to herself. The climax of her vengeance was a calculated act of assassination. Using her knowledge of schedules, security, and weaknesses, she eliminated the primary betrayer of her father in a public yet controlled setting. The act was precise, leaving no doubt that the target was struck for justice, yet carefully designed to avoid implicating innocent parties. Medieval revenge demanded this balance. Punishment without collateral damage that could undermine the avenger's strategy. The effect was immediate. Fear rippled through the court. Nobles reconsidered allegiances. Soldiers, witnessing the precision of the act, recognized that betrayal carried consequences beyond mere whispers. The daughter had transformed personal vengeance into political strategy, demonstrating that medieval revenge could influence entire power structures. Her campaign continued over years. Each ally of her father's betrayers was systematically removed through scandal, exile, or further precision strikes. Lands and titles were seized or redistributed, ensuring that the influence of those who had wronged her bloodline was permanently weakened. By the end of her campaign, the kingdom had shifted in favor of her allies, consolidating her family's power and securing justice across generations. Chroniclers wrote of her cunning and patience, highlighting that revenge was not always immediate or bloody. Medieval revenge was an art, combining intellect, observation and timing. Her legacy became a cautionary tale. The sins of one generation could be repaid by the next, with even greater precision and impact. Her story demonstrates the multifaceted nature of medieval revenge. It was strategic, patient, and psychological as much as it was physical. Personal loss was transformed into political advantage, and justice was delivered not through emotion, but through careful orchestration over decades. The assassin's daughter remains a symbol of calculated vengeance. She exemplifies how patience, intelligence, and long-term planning could achieve results far beyond impulsive acts of retaliation. Medieval revenge, as her story proves, could span generations, reshape kingdoms, and serve as both warning and lesson to all who dared betray. Through her narrative, we see that medieval revenge was never a simple act of anger, it was a deliberate, enduring, and transformative force. The consequences of betrayal extended far beyond the individual, and vengeance, when executed with precision, could alter the destiny of entire realms. In medieval Europe, power was not confined to thrones, armies, or noble titles. Wealth, cunning, and influence often held equal sway. Merchants, though outside the traditional aristocracy, could manipulate markets, fund armies, and shape kingdoms. And when a merchant was wronged, revenge could be as devastating as any sword. This is the story of a merchant whose calculated vengeance changed the balance of power in his city and beyond. The merchant had built his fortune through decades of trade, negotiation, and keen insight into supply and demand. His caravans stretched across kingdoms, carrying textiles, spices, metals, and grain. His wealth made him influential among nobles, kings, and military leaders. Yet his position also made him a target. Envious competitors and corrupt officials plotted against him, seeing his success as a threat to their power. The betrayal came in the form of a royal tax collector and a rival merchant guild. Through bribery, manipulation, and false accusations, they convinced the king that the merchant had engaged in fraud, smuggling, and treason. The merchant's wealth was frozen, his ships confiscated, and his reputation smeared publicly. Medieval courts, heavily influenced by perception, treated accusations with gravity. The merchant faced ruin, imprisonment, or worse. He survived by retreating strategically, hiding his remaining assets, and carefully observing his enemies. Medieval revenge, especially for someone without a sword, relied on intelligence, planning, and patience. The merchant understood that brute force was impossible. Influence, wealth, and cunning were his weapons. Over several years, he rebuilt his network. Trusted traders bribed officials, and even sympathetic nobles became part of a hidden coalition. Medieval revenge, he realized, was as much about creating alliances as it was about punishing wrongs. Knowledge of his enemies' habits, finances, and weaknesses became critical. Every shipment, contract, and negotiation was a step toward his eventual revenge. The first act of vengeance was economic. Using proxies and loyal allies, he manipulated markets, rerouted shipments, and created artificial shortages. His enemies, heavily reliant on commerce for their wealth and influence, suffered financial collapse. Ships were delayed or lost, contracts broken, and reputations tarnished. In medieval society, where wealth equated to power, the impact was immediate and devastating. Next came social and political manipulation. He spread evidence of corruption among the rival merchant guild and the tax collector, ensuring that their own allies began to doubt them. Letters, rumors, and public discoveries portrayed his enemies as greedy, incompetent, and untrustworthy. Medieval revenge required the manipulation of perception. Public opinion could topple fortunes as easily as an army could topple a castle. When the final stage arrived, the merchant struck decisively. He exposed illegal dealings, bribery, and treachery through evidence carefully gathered over years. The king, realizing the truth, revoked the accusations against him while punishing the rivals. Titles and privileges granted to his enemies were stripped, alliances they had built dissolved, and the merchant's reputation was restored and elevated beyond its former glory. The public spectacle of justice reinforced the power of revenge. Medieval audiences, merchants, nobles, and commoners alike, understood that betrayal would not go unpunished. The merchant became a symbol of cunning and patience, demonstrating that intellect and wealth could achieve justice where swords failed. Chroniclers later emphasized the brilliance of his strategy. Unlike impulsive acts of vengeance, his plan was patient, calculated, and comprehensive. Medieval revenge could span years, manipulate markets, influence politics, and alter social hierarchies. His story became a template for others who had been wronged, showing that vengeance was not limited to violence. It could be subtle, pervasive, and transformative. The long-term consequences reshaped commerce and governance. Rival guilds weakened permanently, markets stabilized under his oversight, and officials who had betrayed him were permanently removed from influence. Medieval revenge, as demonstrated, was about creating systemic change, not merely satisfying personal anger. The merchant's tale underscores a critical truth: revenge in the medieval period was multifaceted. It could be military, political, familial, or economic. Patience, knowledge, and strategic planning were as important as swords, armies, or alliances. Through his calculated actions, the merchant not only restored his wealth and honor, but altered the balance of power in his kingdom, demonstrating the enduring impact of revenge. Ultimately, his story highlights the adaptability of medieval vengeance. Whether on a battlefield, in a royal court, or through commerce, revenge required strategy, timing, and precision. The merchant's actions ensured that betrayal carried consequences beyond immediate loss, serving as a warning and lesson for generations to come. Through this narrative, we see that medieval revenge was not a single act, it was a campaign of intellect, patience, and foresight. One person, armed with knowledge and influence, could dismantle rivals, restore honor, and reshape entire systems. In the medieval world, vengeance was a force capable of changing kingdoms, not just lives. In medieval Europe, love was a dangerous game. Royal and noble marriages were arranged for alliances. Wealth, or political advantage, and passion often clashed with duty. Yet when betrayal of a heart intersected with power, revenge could become deadly, reshaping courts and reputations. This is the story of a jilted lover whose calculated vengeance exposed the thin line between passion and peril in medieval society. She was a lady of remarkable beauty, intelligence, and influence. Betrothed in childhood to a young nobleman, she had expected loyalty and partnership, as was customary among high-born marriages. Yet her husband, seduced by ambition and opportunism, turned his affections elsewhere, abandoning both duty and promise. The betrayal was public favors redirected, gifts denied, and humiliations displayed openly in court. Medieval revenge demanded discretion, for direct confrontation could end in exile, imprisonment, or death. The lady retreated from the immediate spotlight, cultivating patience. She learned the habits, desires, and weaknesses of her unfaithful husband, as well as those who aided his betrayal. Knowledge became her weapon, patience her shield. Her first acts of revenge were subtle yet strategic. She influenced court decisions, manipulating alliances to weaken her husband's position. Letters were forged, favors redirected, and rivals subtly encouraged. Every move was carefully calculated to ensure the perception of coincidence rather than orchestration. Medieval courts were rife with rumor and speculation. The clever avenger used this to amplify the effects of subtle acts. Over time, she cultivated allies among influential courtiers, clergy, and even foreign dignitaries who had reason to undermine her husband. Medieval revenge relied on networks. One person, no matter how cunning, could rarely succeed alone. By distributing responsibility and influence, she ensured loyalty while maintaining secrecy. The next phase was psychological. She spread whispers of her husband's indiscretions, exaggerating minor faults and exposing hidden indiscretions. In a court obsessed with honor and reputation, the rumors damaged his credibility. Soldiers, nobles, and advisors began to doubt his judgment, weakening his influence. Medieval revenge, particularly in matters of love and courtly intrigue, relied on perception as much as action. The climax of her plan was both personal and public. During a grand feast attended by nobles and foreign dignitaries, she revealed evidence of her husband's duplicity. Documents, letters, and testimony exposed not only personal betrayal but political misconduct facilitated by his unfaithfulness. Medieval revenge thrived on spectacle. The public exposure amplified humiliation and reinforced the lesson for others. The consequences were devastating for her husband. Titles and privileges were questioned, alliances crumbled, and reputations shattered. His rivals, encouraged by her strategic manipulation, took advantage of the situation. Medieval revenge, when executed with intelligence and timing, could dismantle entire networks of influence without a single blade drawn. The lady's revenge extended beyond punishment. She reasserted her position in court, ensuring that her influence was recognized and respected. Allies were rewarded, loyalty reinforced, and the court structure shifted subtly to favor her perspective. Medieval revenge often had long-term implications, reshaping political and social hierarchies. Chroniclers documented her cunning, noting the precision with which she executed her plan. Songs and tales immortalized the drama of betrayal and retribution, warning that passion, when betrayed, could ignite vengeance more powerful than armies. Medieval revenge was not merely personal, it could influence policy, alliances, and the destiny of kingdoms. The jilted lover's story demonstrates a critical truth: patience, intelligence, and subtlety often produced more enduring results than impulsive acts of violence. Revenge in medieval society was an art, requiring timing, observation, and manipulation of human nature. By orchestrating humiliation, undermining credibility, and exposing betrayal publicly, she achieved justice that resonated across generations. Long term, the effects were profound. Her husband never regained full credibility, alliances shifted, and her network of loyal supporters strengthened. Medieval revenge, particularly in courtly settings, was not only about punishing a personal enemy. It was about demonstrating power, enforcing loyalty, and establishing influence. Through this tale, we see that vengeance in medieval Europe was complex and multifaceted. It was psychological, social, political, and personal. Love and betrayal, when intertwined with power, could produce some of the most calculated and effective acts of revenge in history. The lady's actions ensured that treachery, whether in matters of the heart or politics, carried consequences far beyond the initial act. Her story endures as a testament to strategic patience, clever manipulation, and the art of revenge. In medieval society, those who underestimated the power of perception, patience, and intelligence often paid a high price. Her vengeance became legendary, illustrating that even those without armies or swords could wield influence as deadly as any weapon. Ultimately, the tale of the jilted lover reminds us that medieval revenge was an intricate dance of timing, observation, and calculated action. One act of betrayal could spark a series of responses that transformed reputations, alliances, and history itself. In her hands, personal betrayal became a weapon of lasting impact, demonstrating the enduring power of patience, intellect, and resolve. In medieval Europe, loyalty was the foundation of feudal society. Knights swore fealty to their kings, pledging their lives, honor, and skill to protect the crown and uphold justice. Yet when that trust was broken, the consequences were deadly, and revenge could become a force as mighty as any army. This is the story of a knight whose betrayal by his king transformed loyalty into a relentless campaign of vengeance. The knight had served his king faithfully for years, rising through the ranks due to valor, skill, and strategic brilliance. He commanded respect among soldiers and courtiers alike. His reputation for courage on the battlefield was legendary, and he had won the admiration of nobles and peasants across the kingdom. Yet, even the most loyal knight could fall victim to jealousy, fear, and political ambition. The betrayal began subtly. The king, fearing the knight's growing influence and popularity, began to undermine him. Orders were held, victories unrecognized, and critical decisions were given to rivals. Medieval kings often relied on the loyalty of knights to maintain control over armies and regions. But political insecurity could turn admiration into suspicion, and trust into treachery. The first major act of betrayal came during a campaign against a neighboring kingdom. The knight was given command of a crucial flank, responsible for securing key terrain. Unbeknownst to him, the king had secretly instructed other commanders to leave his flank unsupported, ensuring that failure would fall squarely on the knight. Medieval battlefields were chaotic, but when betrayal was deliberate, even the most skilled leader could be trapped in a carefully orchestrated disaster. The flank was overwhelmed. Soldiers fought bravely, but the enemy exploited the vulnerability. News of the failure spread quickly, and the knight's reputation suffered a blow. Medieval perception mattered as much as reality. One defeat, especially under suspicious circumstances, could ruin a career, strip titles, and destroy alliances. The knight survived, but he understood the betrayal immediately. Medieval revenge required strategy, not impulse. Acting out of anger could result in imprisonment, execution, or exile. He retreated, gathering intelligence, observing the king's decisions, and noting the weaknesses and ambitions of rival commanders. Patience became his weapon, knowledge his shield. Over the following months, the knight built alliances quietly. disaffected no officers who had been mistreated by the king, and even foreign mercenaries were drawn into his network. Medieval revenge often relied on collective action. Individual alone could rarely oppose a king successfully. With allies and information, the knight prepared for a campaign, not only of personal revenge but of strategic correction, restoring his honor while destabilizing his betrayers. The opportunity came when the kingdom faced a new conflict with an ambitious neighboring state. The knight, having gathered loyal forces and intelligence, took control of a decisive portion of the army. Using careful strategy, he exploited the mistakes of rival commanders, many of whom had been complicit in his earlier betrayal. Battles were won decisively, with evidence of mismanagement and treachery carefully documented. Medieval revenge, he knew, needed proof to convince allies and neutral observers that his actions were justified. The king, now aware of the knight's competence, and the extent of prior betrayal, faced a dilemma. Medieval rulers could not easily punish their most successful generals without risking rebellion or further instability. The knight seized the moment. Confronting the king in council with undeniable evidence of the betrayal orders, miscommunicated, support withheld, and deliberate manipulation of troops. The revelation shocked the court, exposing not only political treachery but a failure of judgment at the highest level. The consequences were severe. Commanders who had conspired against the knight were stripped of rank, lands confiscated, and reputations destroyed. Soldiers and nobles realigned loyalties, recognizing the knight's competence and integrity. Medieval revenge was not only about punishing wrongdoing, but restoring balance and reinforcing authority among allies. The knight's personal vengeance extended beyond battlefield corrections. Advisors and courtiers who had propagated rumors or aided the king's betrayal were publicly humiliated. Medieval justice often relied on spectacle. Public acknowledgement of guilt, formal removal from positions, and public confession ensured that lessons were learned, and fear instilled. Chroniclers recorded the tale in vivid detail. Songs, ballads, and manuscripts recounted the knight's trials and strategic brilliance, highlighting the dangers of betraying loyal subjects. Medieval revenge, they noted, was most effective when carefully planned, patiently executed, and publicly acknowledged. It demonstrated that loyalty, though tested, could survive betrayal when intelligence, courage, and timing were employed. Long-term consequences reshaped military and political structures. Command hierarchies were prevent future betrayals, loyalty was reinforced, and the knight emerged as a symbol of honor and cunning. Medieval revenge was transformative. It could correct injustices, punish conspirators, and restore stability simultaneously. The knight's story illustrates a central truth about medieval vengeance: it was rarely impulsive, relying instead on observation, planning and precision. Betrayal by a ruler demanded strategy and alliances, patience and timing, and above all, a clear understanding of the political and social landscape. His revenge was not just personal, it was political, tactical, and enduring. Through this narrative, we see that medieval revenge often intertwined with loyalty, honor, and public perception. One act of betrayal could spark a chain reaction, but patient, calculated action could restore justice, consolidate power, and transform kingdoms. The knight's legacy endured, a testament to the enduring potency of strategic revenge in the medieval era. Ultimately, the tale of the betrayed knight reminds us that medieval revenge was both art and weapon in medieval Europe. Royal blood was both a blessing and a curse. Princes born to inherit crowns often found themselves in deadly games of power, jealousy, and betrayal. One wrong move could lead to exile, imprisonment, or death. Yet, from the shadows of exile, revenge could be nurtured into a force capable of toppling kingdoms. This is the story of an exiled prince whose patient vengeance transformed him from outcast to conqueror. The prince was the second son of a powerful king. Though young, he had demonstrated intelligence, courage, and charisma. Yet medieval succession was unforgiving. His elder brother, groomed from birth to inherit the throne, viewed him as a rival. Subtle whispers, accusations and rumors were planted at court, portraying the younger prince as ambitious, reckless and disloyal. The tipping point came when the prince openly opposed a policy favored by the elder sibling. In medieval courts, public disagreement could be interpreted as insubordination or rebellion. The elder brother seized the opportunity, orchestrating the prince's exile. Lands, titles, and wealth were confiscated. Trusted allies were purged, and soldiers loyal to the prince were reassigned or disbanded. The exiled prince was left with nothing but his wits and a handful of loyal companions. Exile, however, was merely the beginning of medieval revenge. The prince understood that impulsive retaliation would guarantee death. Instead, he observed, learned, and planned. His journeys through foreign lands exposed him to new tactics, armies, and political landscapes. He built alliances with neighboring kingdoms, discontented nobles, and mercenaries. Medieval revenge, he realized, required intelligence, patience, and strategic coalition building. The first phase of his vengeance focused on intelligence gathering. He learned the strengths and weaknesses of his brother's allies, the loyalty of soldiers, and the vulnerabilities of key fortresses. Letters intercepted, spies planted, and rumors disseminated slowly eroded the security of those who had betrayed him. Knowledge became a weapon more potent than armies. Years passed. The prince's network grew in size and sophistication. Loyalists within the kingdom covertly communicated with him, providing updates and subtly undermining the elder brother's authority. Medieval revenge often relied on a combination of direct and indirect actions, ensuring that when the final strike occurred, it would be overwhelming and decisive. The pivotal moment came when the elder brother launched a military campaign against a neighboring realm. The prince returned not as a fugitive, but as a commander with a seasoned army, precise intelligence, and loyal allies. Using a combination of deception, misdirection, and strategic strikes, he turned the tide of the war. Key fortresses fell to surprise attacks, supply lines were severed, and alliances collapsed. Medieval revenge, when executed with planning and foresight, could outmatch even the mightiest armies. As the campaign unfolded, the prince exposed betrayals by his brother's advisors and generals. Those who had conspired against him were publicly punished, their lands seized, and reputations destroyed. Soldiers loyal to the elder brother defected, impressed by the prince's skill, integrity, and charisma. Public perception, vital in medieval society, shifted decisively in his favor. The climax of his revenge was both personal and political. In a decisive battle, the elder brother was captured, stripped of authority, and forced to acknowledge the prince's claim to the throne. Medieval revenge demanded spectacle. Justice was most effective when publicly recognized. The prince's triumph was a demonstration not only of personal vindication, but also of his strategic genius. The consequences were far-reaching. Medieval governance shifted to prevent future betrayals. Advisors and nobles were rewarded for loyalty, and the prince implemented policies to consolidate power and secure the kingdom's stability. His revenge was transformative, restoring honor, securing authority, and establishing a legacy that endured across generations. Chroniclers praised the exiled prince's patience, intelligence, and tactical brilliance. Songs and manuscripts recounted his journey from humiliation to triumph, emphasizing the lessons of loyalty, foresight, and perseverance. Medieval revenge was an art, blending patience, strategy, and the careful orchestration of perception and action. The exiled prince's story illustrates the multifaceted nature of medieval vengeance. It was rarely immediate, it spanned years, required meticulous planning, and relied on both psychological and military tactics. By carefully cultivating allies, gathering intelligence, and timing each move, the prince turned betrayal into opportunity, humiliation into power, and exile into conquest. Through this tale, we see that medieval revenge could reshape kingdoms. One act of betrayal might trigger decades of planning, alliances, and calculated actions, culminating in outcomes far beyond the original personal grievance. The exiled prince's triumph that patience, intelligence, and strategic foresight could overcome even the most severe injustices in the medieval world. Ultimately, the story serves as a testament to the enduring power of revenge. It was more than retribution, it was restoration, transformation, and the ultimate assertion of justice and honor. The exiled prince, once powerless, became a ruler whose story inspired awe, caution, and respect for generations to come. In medieval Europe, castles and fortresses were the heart of power. Commanders who held them controlled territories, armies, and influence. Yet even the most loyal knight could fall victim to betrayal, often at the hands of those he trusted most. This is the story of a knight commander whose revenge, forged through patience and strategy, turned a siege into a tool of justice and power. The knight had risen through the ranks by merit, courage, and tactical brilliance. He commanded a loyal contingent of soldiers, earning the admiration of nobles and kings alike. His victories on the battlefield were numerous. But in the treacherous environment of medieval politics, skill alone could not shield him from envy and conspiracy. The betrayal came from an unexpected source. A fellow commander he had trusted implicitly. Medieval alliances were fragile, shared victories could breed rivalry, and ambition often disguised itself as loyalty. The fellow commander, seeking favor with the king, accused the knight of treason, claiming he had conspired with enemy forces. The allegations were false. But in medieval courts, perception often outweighed evidence. The knight was stripped of authority, and forced to surrender his fortress temporarily, leaving him humiliated and vulnerable. Rather than reacting impulsively, the knight retreated to gather intelligence and allies. Medieval revenge demanded strategy. Acting without foresight could result in imprisonment or execution. Over months, he analyzed his enemy's weaknesses, studied the fortress's layout, and identified loyal soldiers willing to risk their lives to restore justice. Knowledge, patience, and preparation became his weapons. The knight also reached out to neighboring nobles who had suffered from the betrayal or mismanagement of his rival. These alliances, carefully nurtured, expanded his network and strengthened his position. Medieval revenge often relied on coalition. Building a solitary knight, no matter how skilled, could not overthrow a network of conspirators without support. The first act of vengeance was subtle and psychological. The knight disseminated rumors of his rival's incompetence, exposing failures in minor skirmishes and supply mismanagement. Medieval courts, sensitive to reputation, began questioning the rival's judgment. Soldiers, nobles, and even the king's advisors were influenced by these whispers, creating cracks in the rival's authority. Next, the knight meticulously planned a siege against the fortress previously controlled by his betrayer. Using intelligence from spies within the walls, he positioned forces strategically, cut off supply lines and controlled access points. Unlike a reckless assault, his strategy minimized risk while maximizing psychological pressure. Medieval revenge was often as much about demonstrating superiority and instilling fear as about physical conquest. The siege lasted weeks. Within the walls, panic and dissent grew. Supplies dwindled, morale fell, and internal conflicts among defenders were exploited by the knight's allies. Medieval siegecraft combined engineering, patience, and strategic cunning. Catapults, tunnels, and blockades were used alongside diplomacy and psychological tactics. The betrayer, realizing the depth of the knight's preparation, grew increasingly desperate. Finally, the fortress surrendered. Not through storming the gates but through careful orchestration. The knight entered not as a conqueror seeking bloodshed, but as a calculated avenger administering justice. The rival commander was stripped of rank, lands confiscated, and publicly humiliated. Soldiers and nobles who had supported him were reprimanded or removed from influence. Medieval revenge, the knight demonstrated, was most effective when it combined patience, precision, and public acknowledgement. the consequences extended beyond punishment. The knight reasserted authority over his former territories, rewarding loyal soldiers and allies. Governance was stabilized, and military structures were reformed to prevent similar betrayals. Medieval revenge was rarely a simple act, it reshaped hierarchies, restored loyalty, and strengthened institutions. Chroniclers of the time praised the knight's intelligence, patience, and tactical brilliance. Songs and ballads celebrated the siege, emphasizing how skill, strategy, and psychological acumen could overcome betrayal even against formidable odds. Medieval revenge, as illustrated here, was multifaceted. It combined physical, psychological, and political dimensions to achieve lasting justice. The knight's story also highlights the importance of perception. By ensuring that the rival's failures were publicly recognized, and that his own triumph was celebrated with precision, he reinforced loyalty and deterred future conspiracies. Medieval revenge required controlling the narrative as much as the battlefield. Ultimately, the Betrayed Knight's campaign demonstrates the enduring lessons of medieval vengeance: patience, strategy, and foresight could overcome betrayal, restore honor, and reshape power. Through careful orchestration, he transformed humiliation into triumph, demonstrating that intelligence, planning, and precise action could be more powerful than brute force. Alone through this tale we see that revenge in the medieval era was rarely immediate or impulsive. It demanded observation, alliances, and a deep understanding of human behavior and political structures. The knight's siege and calculated retribution remind us that in medieval society, betrayal was dangerous, but patient, strategic vengeance could be devastatingly effective.